And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
I don't care!
What's next?
What's next?
What's next?
Don't you want to hear what's next?
What are you going to do next?
What's next for you?
What's next?
What's next?
Okay, so what's next?
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to the final episode of After the Gold. And this week we're going to be talking about another Francis Ford Coppola masterpiece, The Conversation, the movie that came in between The Godfather 1 and The Godfather 2. I want to talk about why he decided to make this and why it represents the other half of a classic Best Picture follow-up, the other half being an example with Apocalypse Now, but we won't jump into that just yet. But if you're new to the series, welcome. This is the final episode, unfortunately, but we've been having a great time talking about Best Picture follow-up movies. That's what we've been doing ever since March. Don't worry, channel won't be going away. We're just going to be transitioning back into this channel's flagship series, Old's Oscar Countdown, which will start next week, Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you're a fan of After the Gold, feel free to stick around for Old's Oscar Countdown. If you're a fan of Old's Oscar Countdown, we're going to be starting up back in October. So only have to wait one more week before we start to get and break down this year's Oscar season, which of course I love to do. But talking about After the Gold, if you are still new to the series, ever since March, covering Best Picture follow-up movies, essentially the movie a director makes right after winning Best Picture. The first part of the video talking about that production history, what was the increase in budget from the previous movie, what was the context of where the director was coming out of that movie, and then ultimately trying to understand why they decided to make this movie after winning Best Picture. What was it about it? Sometimes, and oftentimes, I think it's more telling of what a director makes after winning a Best Picture than actually winning Best Picture, because it tells us what they want to essentially use their creative capital after winning Best Picture on, and tells us maybe a little bit more about them as a filmmaker and what they're truly interested in when they have that kind of quote-unquote blank check. But the second half of the video, I also talk about the movie itself, why I think it's interesting, why I think it's worth your time, and there really is no kind of through line between the different videos in this series. It really has just been, do we have an interesting production history? Do we have an interesting movie? And this one I want to save for last because I do think it is a masterpiece of Coppola's filmography and a terrific 70s movie that both has A, an interesting production history, but also B, is an interesting movie. So I felt like that was just kind of a good, fitting one to close things out on. But if you've seen the movie, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear that. But without further ado, let's jump into things properly, talk about the production history. And before we go forwards, we have to go backwards. Let's talk about 1972, The Godfather, one of the best movies ever made. It made, like I mentioned, in between. A lot of people consider Godfather 1 and 2 some of the greatest movies ever made, but then when you learn about Coppola's career, you understand and realize, oh wait, he made this one movie in between these two. Maybe that's good as well. And it is. I think a lot of people, look at this period, the 70s of Coppola, and you'd probably rank Godfather 1 or 2 near the top and Apocalypse Now maybe third, and The Conversation is always kind of number 4 in terms of those rankings. That being said, it really is a deserving movie to be talked about, and if this was any other director's, directed by anyone else really, this would maybe be that director's best movie. So it really is a testament to how strong Coppola was as a filmmaker at this point of view. And 72, Godfather comes out. What's interesting, though, is that this is kind of a weird, awkward period where I wasn't sure if I should consider The Conversation as the best picture follow-up or The Godfather Part 2 as the best picture follow-up. Ultimately, I went with The Conversation because I felt it was more in spirit of the show. Essentially, the smaller movie that Coppola had been wanting to make for a long time, whereas The Godfather 2, Coppola was kind of not forced by Paramount, but really heavily encouraged by Paramount to do well. But technically, The Conversation wasn't a Best Picture follow-up movie. The movie was actually shot in the fall of 1972, before Godfather even won Best Picture. The reason why it went into production in the first place was not based on the success of it winning Best Picture, but based on the success of the movie at the box office. See, this was released earlier on in the year in 1972. And in the past, how the traditional movie theater system would work, what you would have a movie like a Lawrence of Arabia, it would premiere at a couple of theaters in the big cities, and then eventually, over the course of a year sometimes, eventually roll out to a bunch of different smaller movie theaters on kind of that was more of a traditional roadshow point of view, but even if it was a major kind of a movie, they would start with showing the movie in 20 theaters and then 60 and then 100 and kind of expand across the country in multiple weeks or months. But The Godfather was one of the first movies before it became really popularized in the 70s with something like Jaws. But Godfather was really one of the first movies to essentially open in a lot of theaters right away, really quickly. So pretty much many theaters in the country, no matter where you were, you could see The Godfather on opening weekend at that same time. It was a huge book, so I think that was kind of the strategy at the time, and it proved to be very successful. I mentioned all this because it was one of the few instances in which the box office results were immediate and quick, and The Godfather became the fastest movie to ever hit $100 million at the box office. So it just did a huge amount of business very quickly because of this strategy. So Paramount wanted to give Coppola, the blank check to do what the next thing is. They were really kind of pushing for The Godfather 2. But one of the conditions of Coppola eventually agreeing to greenlight The Godfather 2 and then eventually direct it himself was, let me make the conversation. This was a movie that he wanted to do with his production company, American Zoetrope, which we talked about on the Apocalypse Now episode. But technically the conversation was financed by Paramount in the kind of director's company at the time, which was Bogdanovich, Friedkin, and Coppola, given money by Paramount to kind of make whatever movies they wanted to. So technically a separate company, but the funding was still from Paramount. So I would still consider this a studio movie rather than an American Zoetrope movie, whereas Apocalypse Now, it was actually Francis Ford Coppola's money and his production company that was making it, versus Paramount, this was still kind of financed by them. But this was kind of one of the conditions of making The Godfather Part 2, which is why I felt like a kind of a Best Picture follow-up. It was more in the spirit of the show to say, this is the small movie made in between the kind of two big pillars, the movie that is them him saying, okay, really want to get this movie made. It's a smaller movie. I don't know if I can get this made without the success of Godfather. So a long way of saying that this is not technically a Best Picture follow-up, as it is more so just a huge box office success follow-up. But the movie is made, it comes out and premieres at Cannes in 1974 and great success, wins the Palme d'Or, eventually gets nominated for Best Picture. Box office is okay, but in terms of a strategy of, okay, let's make a smaller movie and with kind of more modest aspirations, the fact that it wins the Palme d'Or and then goes on to win or get nominated for Best Picture is a huge success for a Best Picture follow-up movie. The movie that it ended up losing to, though, interestingly, was Francis Ford Coppola for The Godfather Part 2. They both ended up releasing in the same year in 1974. So there's a possibility that The Conversation is released in 1973 and wins Best Picture in 1973, and then Coppola wins for 3 years in a row for Best Picture. That would be pretty crazy. That's not what happened here. He lost to himself, but just from a point of view of a kind of modern day reputation, The Conversation is still seen as a very well regarded movie. I think has grown in estimation over the coming years as more and more people, yes, watch The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, but also The Conversation. It's always kind of lumped in with those classic types of movies because this is the films that Coppola was making at the time. And I think for many Best Picture follow-ups, most of them don't even get nominated for Best Picture. And the fact that this one did and still has kind of resonated in the modern day age, I do think ultimately is a success of this movie. But now transitioning more so into the second part of this video, my thoughts on the film, because I do want to talk about my thoughts on the film. My thoughts are that it's terrific, that this is a masterpiece and an absolutely great movie, but a movie that maybe is seen in that kind of fourth position amongst Coppola's 70s movies because its aspirations aren't as grandiose as something like Apocalypse Now. That being said, what it does do is, I think, accurately nail those aspirations. This is a character study, and this is a very well done character study, and everything about its construction and its writing and its performances is to tell us the story through the point of view of Harry Kalk, played brilliantly by Gene Hackman. So from the filmmaking point of view, the way Coppola structures this movie, I think is very smart by essentially keeping everything within Harry's point of view and where he sees. Gene Hackman plays Harry Kalk, this expert wiretapper who becomes a little too invested in a case that he is doing for one of his richer clients. He potentially thinks there's a murder going on, becomes paranoid, and that's the kind of a paranoid thriller kind of a movie that this is, and that's the character study and the point of view that ultimately we take. There is very few scenes, if not any scenes, I think, in the movie where we aren't with Gene Hackman's character. The way things are shot are very kind of tight and close with scenes in which we're either over the shoulder or kind of seeing in these kind of more intimate close-ups and these quieter scenes or mediums with Harry Culk and his kind of point of view. And in the movie never kind of diverts and divulges away from that. So we're never privy to new information that our main protagonist knows. And this decision, this writing decision to make this point of view, to not reveal any kind of dramatic irony to the audience or anything like that, by essentially restricting the information to only what the characters know, and then the camera style of keeping in a kind of close, intimate point of view, always showing our character of Harry, never kind of straying away from him. What that does is, I think, at least what it does for me, is puts myself in the shoes of his character, and also makes us paranoid because we have that lack of information, because we only see these kind of small glimpses of what Harry Culk is seeing. We kind of understand his paranoia that grows and grows throughout the film as he's trying to understand and unravel this great mystery, because there is maybe something malicious going on, and he starts to question more of his morals and ethics and his position within this kind of a story. And the interesting part about, I think, in the second half is maybe trying to debate why he's doing the things that he's doing without spoiling things, and what's his kind of motivation for doing things. But we're talking so much about Coppola and his writing style of limiting information, but you really have a terrific performance here with Gene Hackman that so much of the movie is reliant upon him, and he kind of takes that and runs with it. This is a performance that I think could be big, that could be manic, and someone that's kind of losing their mind. Think of something like Travolta in Blowout, which is a movie I think is another masterpiece and I love, but he's maybe a little bit more sweaty and panicked throughout the entire movie. But the interesting thing about this movie and the way Hackman plays it is very reserved. He is a classic listener. He is an introvert. He is a shy kind of person. He does this position not because he wants to interact with a lot of people, because he enjoys listening and watching. But he's not someone that's going to engage and to show action. So I think Jack Hackman makes an interesting choice to be very reserved in this movie. An actor who can be big and grandiose. We've seen him, a couple years earlier in The French Connection with Popeye Doyle, be that kind of loud, boisterous persona. But he doesn't do that with the conversation. It's always quiet. It's always reserved. He never kind of raises his voice too often or gets really panicked until things get really, really serious. It's all kind of more considered, more cautious, and Hackman never really gives us too much, which I think allows us to always kind of be questioning his motives and his point of view. In particular, the second half of the movie, which I think really grows not only in a mystery movie, but in a character study, in which we're trying to I'm more interested, not necessarily in the mystery of what's going on with this potential murder or potential kind of cover-up, but more so within the way Harry reacts to things through Gene Hackman's performance. Because we start to see him maybe do things not necessarily in the interest of saving another person or doing things that are in the right point of view, but trying to essentially get himself out of a jam. What's interesting about this kind of interpretation of, which is essentially an introvert who gets caught up in things, is that he's introverted in the sense that he is ultimately selfish, that he's not an introvert who hears something bad and wants to take action because it's his guilt taking over things, but he's trying to almost take himself out of a situation. He's fallen too deep into a situation, into a kind of potential murder case, and the second half he's trying to wind himself out of it rather than trying to go deeper and trying to save someone. I think he's interested in first at that curiosity of things, but once he gets in so deep, he becomes more of a selfish protagonist, which I think is really interesting, kind of a switch and an interesting point of view on the introvert. The introvert necessarily as someone who doesn't like to speak, but an introvert who's so introverted because they only enjoy spending time with themselves because they're almost selfish. And it's that kind of pure negative impulse of a curiosity that when used to kind of serve your own interests and needs, rather than actually trying to learn or understand something, but more in terms of a compulsion to know, is a bit of a double-edged sword, and actually comes up to bite him later on in the film. Interesting, I think, kind of a character study and decision by Coppola in the second half of the movie to kind of point the story back on Culk and his morals and what he is kind of implicated in, and actually challenge kind of his point of view the way we haven't necessarily were in the first half of the movie, which I think makes it more of an interesting kind of an actual character study of a man rather than just like an interesting mystery of what's going to happen next and a boom bap. It's more of a, okay, what does this actually say about this person? What does that say about maybe our own personal paranoia or curiosities and these kind of compulsions to know more, or to gossip, or to trying to understand things that even though we know is probably none of our business, that we probably shouldn't get into, there's still this kind of dark allure that we're always attracted to. So by kind of keeping us within Culk's point of view early on in the film, what that does is, I think, help us empathize with him and help us understand his point of view, that we also do become paranoid, so that by the time the end of the movie comes around and we start to kind of criticize and I think question the morals of Culk's character, we're also questioning the morals of the audience and their point of view, because we've so kind of identifiably empathized and got on the journey of Culk and his point of view, so that when we start to kind of the movie starts to fall apart and everything kind of zeroes in and narrows in on his character, it, I think, adds to a little bit more of an emotional reckoning in the second half of the movie. So a character study hyper-focused on one man, his point of view, his thoughts, his interests, but then also his guilt and his flaws. So much so that when he tries to step out of his world, his world kind of crumbles and becomes this kind of fascinating destruction of paranoia and guilt and morality that I think is really interesting and always kind of helps me learn something different each time I see the movie. So I really do think it's a masterclass in a character study, in a point of view of a man, both in its filmmaking style and its writing, its decision to withhold certain information from us, but then also with just an absolutely terrific, smart decision performance by Gene Hackman, with some really interesting, I think, themes of guilt and introversion and how much we should be involved or not involved within kind of the world at large. It's a really fascinating movie. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. But that's about it. That's the end of this series. It had a real blast covering it, so I hope you enjoyed it as well. But stay tuned to next week. We're back, Olds Oscar Countdown. I'm going to be talking about my Best Picture predictions before going down the more traditional path of talking about each and every category, and then SAG and Golden Globes and, you know, doing the whole traditional stuff that we always do. Multiple videos a week, as always with that. Going to be trying some new things as well, like I always do with that series, but still be relatively traditional, and it should be a really fun series because I don't know what's going to win Best Picture, so excited to talk about that. But that's about it. Until next time. Stay tuned.